Okay, so now let's go through actually how to set up our virtual network so our machines will be able to talk to each other and our laptops can actually talk to our virtual machines. So what you're going to want to do on a Kali Linux machine in the VirtualBox window, you're going to want to right click it again, click on settings, and then click on network and change the attached option, the attached to option to host only, alright? So what this is going to do is going to make a pretty much like a private little network with just the host so that, you know, your host has an IP address and your Kali Linux machine has an IP address and they can talk to each other, okay? So now let's go through the process of setting up our target machines. So we're going to set up two target machines right now. The first machine is called Metasploitable, and the second one is called OWASP, Broken Web App Machine. So these are virtual machines that are made vulnerable on purpose, you know, for educational and training purposes, you know, like this class. So we're going to use them as our proving grounds or training grounds in a sense. So you can download them from these two links right here. And you're gonna notice that they come in the form of .vmdk files, and that just means that, you know, we just have to select this file as the hard drive when we create the virtual machine, if you remember that option during the process. So now let's actually go through the process of doing one of these. So I'm just gonna click on Metasploitable link. I'm gonna click on download. It's gonna say your download will start shortly. You don't have to click any links or buttons, it'll do it for you, so don't worry. So now let's see, let's put this on the desktop, hit save, and it's going to take a little bit of time to download. So once that's downloaded, we're going to come back and we're going to extract it. Okay, so now we have a zip file downloaded. So I have 7-zip installed, so I can just right click and hit extract here, and it's going to extract out the .vmdk file, as you can see right there, into this folder Metasploitable2-Linux. Okay, so that's what a VMDK file is going to be that we're going to want. So once this is done, in a couple seconds, there we go, we're going to open up VirtualBox. We're going to click on New. And I'm going to name it Metasploitable, if I spelled it right, I think so. Change the type to Linux. Let's just choose the Linux 2.6 kernel version. And you can keep these as the defaults because these machines aren't for performance, so it doesn't matter. So right here is the option I was talking about, using existing virtual hard disk, okay? So you're gonna click the little folder right here. We're gonna click add. We're gonna go to our desktop, Metasploitable 2, and then choose this file right here. And let's see, and click on it. Double click on it and hit create. And now we have our Metasploitable machine. We can right click it, hit start, normal start. And it's gonna boot up just like, you know, just like the Kali machine did, but it's a lot faster because it's already a created machine. We're just booting it up, okay? And then when you get into the main screen, it'll give you the login information if you want. But really, we just want this machine up, and we want to go through and actually do the host only network settings like for the Kali machine. So let's walk through that really quickly. So for the Kali machine, right click settings, network, change from NAT to host only adapter, alright? And we're gonna want to do the same thing for Metasploitable. So settings, network, and then host only. Click the wrong one, host only, and then we're good to go. And then you want to do this exact same thing for the Broken Web Apps VM. And then we have our target set up, and they can all talk to each other. Okay, so now this next step is optional. You can do this if you have the capability to do so, but we're gonna also want to set up an Active Directory domain. Whether you do it or not doesn't really matter because I'm still gonna showcase the attacks against the Active Directory domain. But the main step, the main reason for doing this one as well is just to give you a better idea of what you'll actually see in the real world. Okay, if you were to become an ethical hacker or a penetration tester. So pretty much we're going to set up a domain controller that's running Windows Server 2012, and a Windows 10 client that's going to join that domain. Now, like I said, I'm going to showcase some attacks, so that's why we're going to want to do this. So I have these links right here that you can go to where you can download the ISO files and just install the virtual machines just like the other ones that we did. Where you use the ISO file to install it, kind of like the Kali Linux VM, and then you're just setting it up from scratch. And I'm going to walk you through some of the settings for actually setting up the domain. It's pretty quick. It'll probably take us less than like 30 minutes to do it, and then we'll be good to go. Okay, so now we're just going to go through the basic setup for Windows Server 2012. So when you get prompted with this screen, just hit install now. It's going to start the setup process. So you're going to choose the second one where you're going to choose the server with a GUI, or else you're just going to have a command line. Accept the license terms, custom install. You're going to choose right here and click on next, and then it's going to go through the install process. It's pretty pain free. So just go through this, and then we're going to get back to setting up our... Okay, so once that process finishes, it's just going to reboot the virtual machine. Then you're going to have the Windows logo here, and it's going to be loading. It's going to boot up for the first time. Then you're just going to go through some initial setup, and then we're going to start to set up our domain controller. Okay, so we're setting the password for the administrative account on the domain controller. So super secret password, that's not the password. Super secret password. Finish. And now we have a login. So you're gonna want to send a Control-Alt-Delete. I'm pretty sure you can insert Control-Alt-Delete right there. Putting your super secret password. It's gonna log you in for the first time, and it's gonna, just like any other computer, when you first log in, it's doing some setup stuff. Might be a little bit slow, but what you're gonna see is with Windows Server, there's always something called Server Manager that pops up automatically. And this is where you're gonna do a lot of the initial, setup for your domain controller, or just in general. We're gonna hit yes right here. So we're gonna let that load up, and then we're gonna be able to set up our domain. Okay, so from the dashboard, the first thing that we're gonna want to do is configure this local server. So one thing I like to do is change the computer name. So go in there, click change. I already have it here, but just put in like lab domain controller or lab DC, whatever you want it to be. I'm gonna put lab-DC for lab domain controller, and I'm gonna hit OK. And then it'll ask you if you want to restart, so the changes will apply. We don't have to do that right now. We just restart later. It's not too big of a deal. One other thing I like to do is make sure that I know what the IP address for my devices are. So you can go in here and you can actually give it a static IP address so that it will always have this IP address when it's on the network. So I think our address is 192.168.56, and then we can give it whatever other address that we want. So let's just make it .20 for instance. And I believe that's going to get automatically our subnet mask that we want. So remember, this is like a /24 network, so there's only 256 possible addresses for this one. So we're going to hit OK on that. Exit out of this stuff. And then that's some of the initial stuff that we just need to do. So now what we're going to want to do is go through and set up. We're going to add up our roles and features for our domain controller. So we have to make this, a domain controller first. So you're going to click there, and then before you begin, you can hit skip this page by default if you don't want to see it again. And then we're going to do role-based or feature-based installation. We're going to choose this server right here. Don't worry if the IP address is there. Don't worry about it. That'll change when the computer restarts to the static one that we chose. So now we're going to want to check Active Directory domain services and DNS server. So let's look for it. So Active Directory domain services, add, and then also DNS server. Okay. And that's all we're going to need for now for what we're going to be doing. Bam. Hit next. And then just hit next on this right here. Just keep hitting next, and we should be good to go. And then we're just gonna set it to restart automatically, just so you know it'll restart if we need to. And then hit install, and it's gonna install those features. And now this is going to be our domain controller. So now once this restarts, we're gonna go through some more settings to actually set up the domain and promote it out to other devices on the network so that they can join the network, join the domain that we're gonna be creating. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and create our domain. So we're gonna click right here on this little flag with the little yellow triangle is that looks like an arrow. Click on promote this server to a domain controller. So then now we're gonna click on add a new forest right here when the option is available. Now this is gonna allow us to name our domain and actually go through the creation process for our domain. So give it a minute and it'll pop up. I just rebooted the computer, so it's a little bit slow. Okay, so now the option is available, so let's click on add a new forest. I'm gonna name this ethical.hacking lab. That's gonna be the name of my domain that I'm about to create. So hit next, and then we're just gonna want to put a password in right here. Don't forget the password, just in case, you never know. Keep it simple, and then we're just gonna click through everything else. It's pretty much populating all these initial settings for our domain. We're gonna hit next. It's gonna check for any prerequisite. It's gonna check through its prerequisites for any issues or errors that we might run into. So it's verifying that we're able to make this server the domain controller. So to give this a minute while it's verifying, you can pretty much ignore these errors. I wouldn't worry about it too much. So let's go ahead and hit install. And this is going to go through the process of creating our domain and making this the domain controller. So let's go ahead and let this load, and then we can get to the next steps. Okay, so now we're going to have to restart the computer because we did install, Active Directory services on here. And then after we do that, we should be good to go. So one other thing we're going to want to do is that we're going to want to create an Active Directory user. We can create a couple, but really right now we just need to create one for when we do add the Windows 10 machine to the domain. So we're going to go ahead and open up Active Directory. So let's see. We should just be able to type it in here and it should come up. Give it a minute. Active Directory users and computers. So we're going to open that up. I should have gave this thing more RAM. It's a little slow. Okay, so now on the ethical, this is our, so you see that we have our domain here, and then we're going to click on users. And then we just right click pretty much anywhere, new user. And we can give them a name. I'm going to name this poor victim. You don't really have to give it a name if you don't want to. You might have to actually. So poor name, full name, poor victim. Use the login name. We're gonna say poor victim again, and this is representing, that's their logon for this domain, and that's their login username pretty much. So we're gonna hit next. We're gonna give them a password. Let's see, just any password really. I would say keep it a little bit simple. So just, I don't know, password. And then password. And I'm not going to make them change it when they log in for the first time. And I'm going to make it so that they can't change their password. And that it never expires. There we go. Perfect. And then hit finish. Okay, I guess that meets some complexity requirements. So let's see. 1 exclamation point. There we go. That should make it better. Exclamation point. There we go. So now we have a domain account on here for that machine when we do create it, and now we're going to be good to go. Okay, so once you get through the initial Windows 10 setup, you can choose this option right here, domain join instead, and it's going to allow us to join the domain that we just created. So now we need to put in our name, so we know that this is poor victim. Of course. And we're gonna make a password for them. Just poor, and we'll just make a password. one exclamation point. We'll just make it that. And then one more time. And this is like the local account for the computer. And it makes you do all this security stuff, so go ahead and do that. I'm going to skip through it. So when you get to this screen, you can just hit accept or turn off some of this stuff. Like, I mean, if you don't want all this stuff on, which you probably don't, just go ahead and turn it off. Turn all of them off. Hit accept. And then it's probably going to load us into our screen soon. And then we can do our initial setup. It's very quick with this one. We're just going to change the host name, give it a static IP address, and join the domain. Okay, so once you have Windows 10 loaded up and you go through, all the basic, initial startup settings for Windows 10, then what we're going to do here is very, very quick. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our IP address. So what you can do is right click on this icon right here, network internet settings, Ethernet, change adapter options. Right click here, properties, and we're going to double click where you see IPv4 or Internet Protocol version 4. And we're going to give it a specific address to use for the IP address. So 192.168. Okay, it's not working. 192.168.56, and then .21. That's what it's going to be for this one. It's going to automatically give us the subnet mask that we want, and we're going to keep the default gateway to where it is. And then we're also going to set the DNS server as the domain controller. This is going to allow us to connect out to the domain. So that 20. There we go. So now what we can do is we can open up a command prompt, and then we can try to see if we can ping our domain. So let's see what happens. So open up command prompt. So ping. Remember, mine was called ethical.hackinglab. And bam, we can ping the domain. So that means that we can join it. Okay, so now let's actually go through the process of joining the domain now that we know that we can connect to it. So let's go over here and open up our control panel. We're going to click on System and Security. We're going to click on System. And then we're going to click on Change Settings right here. And this is going to allow us to change our the name of the computer as well. So we can change it to Windows 10-target. And we're going to join the domain. Click the box right here. Ethical.hackinglab. There we go. That's the name of our domain. We hit enter. Just hit OK right here. It's not too big of a deal. It's just your NetBIOS name. And now it's going to pop up with a box that's going to ask us to input administrative credentials. So this is whatever the admin credentials you set, on the domain controller. So let's go ahead and try that out now. Super secret password. Bam. We're on the domain. So we're good to go. So we hit OK. And now we have a domain where so what we're going to do is we don't have to worry about that. So we have to restart our computer. And what we're going to do is we're going to log in to the computer with the poor victim account that we created. Okay, so once your computer is restarted, you should be a member of the domain. So we're going to pick on other users. So it's going to say sign into ethical. That's the ethical hacking domain. So what we're going to do, let's see, poor victim. And then we're going to put in the password. And it should sign us in to the domain. And it's an initial login for the domain, so it might take a little bit of time. And it's gonna do this right here, even though we were logged in before, because now we're logging in with the domain account. Okay, so once all this stuff is done, you're pretty much good to go, and you have your domain together. And we're gonna be able to use it when we start attacking our networks. Okay, so now that we have our lab set up and everything is supposedly on the same network, we can go ahead and test connectivity between our machines. So you see some screenshots here. These are showing the command prompt output from when I ran, the IP config or IF config command. So before we do this, just make sure that the network adapter setting for each VM is set to the host only mode. And then that's going to allow us to test the connectivity by doing a ping. All right. So like I said, you can find the IP address, open up Windows and type in ipconfig, or in Mac or in Linux type in ifconfig. And the virtual machines, they're Linux, so you can just use ifconfig to find it. Okay, so now let's actually go through the process of testing connectivity between these so I can show you guys that it actually works. So I'm gonna open up a command prompt. I'm gonna type in ipconfig, and we're gonna look for one that says Ethernet adapter VirtualBox host only network. So my address for my laptop on that network that is set up is 192.168.56.1. So now let's go over to our Metasploitable machine, type in ifconfig. Now if your address doesn't start with the same 192.168. whatever as your as your laptop does, try to reboot this, because you might need to reboot it after you change the network adapter setting. So just keep that in mind. So now that we know that they're pretty much on the same subnet, I could try to ping 192.168.56.1, and we're getting responses back. So now these machines can talk to each other. So that's awesome. So just for you guys' reference as well, I want to let you know where you can find other machines that you can practice on. We're going to talk about this a little bit at the end of the course as well, but I just wanted to, offer this out right now if you wanted to expand your hacking lab to test on some things as you learn. Here are a couple options of where you can get some virtual machines to test on. So vulnhub.com, they allow you to download virtual machines that were intentionally made vulnerable so that you can practice hacking. Now I will warn you that some of them are extremely hard, so be careful. And then there's also hackthebox.eu, is a site where you can connect directly to a network of vulnerable machines and then attempt to hack into them for practice. But the catch with this website is you have to hack into the website to actually gain access to it. So that one's pretty fun. Don't cheat, all right? Okay, so we got our lab set up, so what's next? So before we dive into the first stage of hacking, it's actually essential that we go over some Linux and scripting basics. So I'm going to quickly go over some Linux fundamentals, Python fundamentals, and Bash basics so that you're ready to encounter and use them when you're hacking. So I appreciate you guys for watching this section of the course, and I'll see you in the next section.